Jared and I are going to go over probably 4 topics. Jared will start and kick it off, but what we're going to try to do is after each topic have a Q&A just so that you can have your questions associated with whatever topic we talk about. And from here, I'll let Jared kick it off.
Here are 4 topics. We'll jump into the first one, forming a company. So, forming a company, there's basically 2 key takeaways that I want you to remember here. If you're planning on raising venture capital type money, even if it's not tomorrow, right, but it's a couple years out for you, you want to be a Delaware C corporation. Okay, so that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is everybody on the company needs to have vesting from day one. Okay, so I'm going to go into those things now, but those are the 2 key takeaways. Delaware C Corp, every single person should have vesting. Okay, so I get this question all the time. Why a Delaware C Corp? You know, can I be an LLC? There's tax advantages. I'm a California company. Shouldn't I be a California corporation? Everything we're talking about today is for high growth businesses who are seeking venture funding at some point. And so the reason for Delaware C Corp is very simple. Investors are managing a portfolio of companies. The best investors tend to have large portfolios of companies, right? An extreme example of this is Y Combinator, which literally has a portfolio of thousands of companies. The only way for them to effectively manage all of those companies is to have all of those companies on the same playbook, playing by the same rules. So the market has coalesced around one specific set of laws. That happens to be Delaware corporations. The reason that they've coalesced around Delaware corporations is Delaware law is very progressive in keeping up with technology and is very management favorable. So they accept digital signatures. All the filings can be done online within 24 hours. Places like California tend to be very much more minority interest and stockholder favorable, whereas Delaware companies tend to kind of see things on the side of the management and the board of directors. Everybody here, I'm assuming, is more in kind of the founder management role. So if you're choosing between, hey, do I want to set up where that empowers the management to have more autonomy and make decisions, or to go out to each individual stockholder and get sign off on everything, you probably want to be empowered to be able to move quickly and nimbly and not have to go out and get consents all the time. One of the things that I'll talk about really quickly is this idea of, well, what does it cost to incorporate a company? There's a lot of different answers to that. It's, there depends on how specific it is. But, at Atrium, our standard incorporation fee is $3,000. So I literally had the question today from somebody, which was, hey, $3,000, like, can I go online and do this for a couple $100? And my answer to that is, yeah, you totally can. When you're thinking about legal basics and working with the lawyer, one of the things that you need to understand is you're paying for a person for their experience. Even within Atrium, which is technology enabled, ultimately there's somebody there who has been doing this for 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 hours and can parse through things and give you guidance. And that comes at a cost. And if you're in a position where you just can't afford that, there are other tools, but that's what you're buying. All of the repeat founders that I work with tend to engage professional service providers earlier in the company's life cycle. Lawyers, accountants, and that's not because they all have made a ton of money and are just willing to blow money and spend it, and the rest of us have to be more frugal. That's because they've gone through enough cycles where they know having a good quality advisor can actually save you a lot of time and effort if you're willing to make that investment up front. So, I'm not going to do this whole thing as a pitch about Atrium, but I do think it's very important to understand we're talking about legal basics. There are online tools and software tools that you can use that are pure self-serve, and those have a purpose. And there's something different, which is engaging an experienced practitioner. You might not remember all the things that I just said, but hopefully you feel like it was a well-reasoned position and that you're willing to accept these takeaways, which is, I need to form a Delaware C Corp if I'm gonna play this game. And I didn't even touch on this point. Implement vesting for all companies. So one of the questions that I get sometimes is, I'm a solo founder. Why do I need vesting? I'm 100% owner. Or I'm starting my company with a friend, somebody I worked with for 10 years. We're not going to have a founder breakup. We know what we're doing together. My position is I've seen this go south enough times where, let's assume you're right. Let's assume you're a solo founder and you're not going to take on any co-founders. So you give yourself a 4-year vesting schedule and you build your company for 4 years and you're no worse off. You build the company for 2 years and you do an acqui-hire or you do a quick sale. you're the sole owner. It doesn't matter if you're 50% vested or 100% vested, right? You're probably going to accelerate your vesting then anyways. You're no worse off. In the rare circumstance where you find yourselves 2 or 3 years into a venture, you have a disagreement as a management team and you cannot get on the same page, and somebody decides to leave, you cannot afford to have your company saddled with a 30% stockholder who's not in the game and contributing anymore. I have seen this happen over and over again, and there's just no reason to do this. It's a red flag to investors. I think it shows a lack of sophistication, and there's really no downside, but there's a huge upside to having this protection, to have everybody have skin in the game and understand that, you know, the idea to get the company off the ground is not worth that much. It's the 4 years of hard work and execution to make this business successful, which is how you earn your stock, and that includes founders just like it includes employees. You want to hold your employees to the same standards that you're holding yourself.
So you have your business, you're formed. Now what's next? I'm on my own. I need some people to help me grow this business. So the next thing we want to touch on is your first hire. A lot of people probably will hear your advisor harp on, do you have an employee or do you have an independent contractor? And some people don't really worry about that distinction in the beginning, but it's something that you should pay close attention to. The main reason why is the IRS. They will come for you. If you have an employee that you're treating as an independent contractor, you could be subject to 41% of whatever that contractor is charging you. You could be subject to additional penalties. In some circumstances, you can be subject to jail time. And then also you will be considered a tax evader, which I don't think that's the worst of all those things, but it is a bad thing. When you are hiring your first hire, think about how they fit into the structure. So in terms of making the distinction between so what is an independent contractor versus an employee, and how do I make a distinction? So typically you think of, it's all a holistic kind of analysis. So you look at all the things that these individuals are providing for your company. The first thing you look at is, is this individual have their own financial structure? So I am not dictating as an owner or an employee where they're putting their money, how they're earning their money, and more importantly, how they're doing the work. So the main distinction between employees and contractors are how much control do you have over that particular individual? And that can always be kind of more of like a litmus test to be, where am I falling on that whole spectrum? You should definitely talk to somebody if you think you're kind of on the line in terms of who you're hiring, if they may be an independent contractor or an employee. Now, what types of documents do we use for each of these types of individuals? So for an employee, obviously you'd have an offer letter, and that's pretty standard terms. We're in California, so you have at will. In terms of whether you are an independent contractor, that can fall under the camp of either consultant or advisor. They're two different documents. Most people kind of lump them together in terms of I have a consultant or an advisor. But again, like I said, they're two different documents trying to do two different things. So in terms of a consultant, what a consultant there is to help you with a specific problem or a challenge that you have with your company. Whereas an advisor is there more as a mentor to guide you. So that's another way you can make the distinction between the two, whether you have an advisor versus a consultant, and which agreement to use. Now, you have these people, how do you pay them? Most startups in the beginning are not very have a lot of cash flow. So usually people turn to equity. Equity is kind of a very interesting topic. We could go down a huge rabbit hole talking about what is an ISO, what's an NSO, when do you need a 409 grant, all of these things that in and of itself could be a topic. The one thing I want to touch on when you're dealing with equity is talk to the experts. You don't want to dabble in equity. Kind of like I say, you don't want to dabble in tax. So there are kind of varying camps in terms of how much equity you grant someone if they are your first hire. Jared and I were talking about this, and we both heard different things. So anywhere from 10 to 15%, they say, should be allocated for your first hires. And that could be, obviously distributed however you feel. Some people think that that's very high. But if you're thinking that these individuals are coming into your company off the ground, they're going to help build something for absolutely no pay, it's not that bad, right? You still get the rest. So Atrium just started a new hiring tool. So we just launched it today. So I don't know if we have any Atrium clients actually in the room, but it's actually a way that you can go in and do a lot of the hiring, have more transparency and more flexibility in terms of how you hire consultants, employees, and advisors. There are a lot of Atrium people in the room that can show you kind of like a demo of what that looks like, but it's a really cool tool that we've kind of implemented for all of our clients that gives you a little more control over how the process goes, and also educates you along the way to kind of give you this distinctions between what I was essentially just talking about. So I would say the key takeaways, as I said, was understanding the differences between the classifications so that you know you're using the right documents. So do I have an employee? Do I have an independent contractor? And if it's an independent contractor, is that person a consultant or are they an advisor? And all these documents do different things, and that's why we're kind of harping on making sure that you're doing the right classification when you're bringing people into the company. The second thing, taxes are very important for equity grants. So that's what I was saying in terms of you want to make sure that you're engaging someone who is very knowledgeable when you are setting up equity stock for your employees, because it is very important that, first of all, that the right documentation is in place to begin with. You want to make sure that if you are issuing, say, restricted stock, so you're issuing common stock, what's the difference between issuing restricted stock versus stock options? Restricted stock, that individual actually has a vote. They're a shareholder from day one. Stock options, they have to buy that vote at a later date. So it just impacts how your cap table looks, how many people are on your cap table, what flexibility you have in terms of votes if you have to have a shareholder vote. So these are all things that you should take into consideration and that will come up down the road. We're going to talk about what happens in a financing and how you can set yourself up. And I think Jared touched on some of it when he talked about where are you incorporating. A lot of this comes into play as well down the road when people are doing diligence to make sure that all this documentation is in place.
There's a lot of stuff that you can get wrong as an early stage company and fix it. There's two things that you really don't want to get wrong. One is ownership of the company, right? That's the vesting schedules and all this stuff that we've been talking about. The second thing is the intellectual property of the company. For most of us who have worked in technology companies as employees before we went out and became entrepreneurs, we signed a IP assignment agreement, right? We had an offer letter that set forth our salary and how many stock options we would get, and then we had a confidentiality and intellectual property invention assignment agreement. Okay, mouthful, but every Silicon Valley company has them, and it's very simple. It says, while you work for the company and work on the company's products, we own all the stuff that you invent. You want to enter into that agreement with yourself and your company. You want all of your employees and contractors and advisors to enter into those agreements. There's different flavors of that depending on what the relationship is, and I won't get into all of that. But every single person in the early days is typically a key contributor and needs to enter into those. For the most part, we want every single person to do this. I'll give you a war story to just illustrate this point. Because what happens a lot of times is we understand this conceptually, but we're so busy on building product, we're so busy on hiring, we're so busy on doing all the other things, we forget to have people sign it. And so I had a client where we're in the middle of a Series A financing, great investor, had the terms that we wanted. We're going through the entire diligence process, which is give me a list of everybody who's ever touched this company and show me their IP assignment agreement. And we were checking all those boxes, and then we realized, oh, this consultant has a consulting agreement with an IP assignment in our data room, but the company never actually got them to sign it. And just so happens that they actually have moved on and haven't been with the company for a year. So we track them down, we explain the situation, we're in the middle of financing, we're raising money, this is a blocker for us. 99 times out of 100, that person signs the agreement in good faith and you move on. In this particular instance, I had a person who they just said, well, why should I sign it now? What's my incentive, right? And the way that we resolved it is we ended up giving them 4 times the amount of stock in order to get them to sign it, because the investor wouldn't move forward with the deal because this was a key engineer, and it was either get the rights to this intellectual property, or we're going to set our product roadmap back 3 months by ripping this out and rebuilding it. And the company decided it was better to keep the momentum and to give the person the stock. So that doesn't happen a lot, but it does go to show you that this is a very standard document. It's not negotiated. It's signed on the dotted line. But if you don't get that signature on the dotted line, every once in a while, it can end up being a landmine that you step on. And the default laws governing who owns this intellectual property is very complex, which is why we kind of take it out of the court of
well, what does the default California law say? And we say we're going to put into a very simple private contract where we know what we're getting, and we're going to have every single person sign this. Another thing, which is completely unrelated, but something that I see people run into fairly often, is jumping into branding and marketing and actually investing in those without doing any kind of trademark search. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who they got the exact name they wanted, they've spun up their entire website and product line, all their marketing materials, maybe even bought a domain name that was a non-trivial purchase for their business. And then they realize, oh no, there's somebody else operating a very similar business, maybe not as technological, but it's similar, and they've already trademarked this name. And now, like, if I go forward, I could be infringing it, but at the very least, I can't actually produce a trademark around this name. So I don't really want to get into all the details of what a trademark is, but essentially what it is it's the right to do business under a certain parameter. Could be a certain name, could be a certain logo, in some cases could be a certain slogan. But if somebody owns that right, it doesn't matter how much money you've invested in that domain name. It doesn't matter how much money and time you put into those marketing materials. They can tell you to stop using it, and if you don't, you're infringing their intellectual property and they can shut you down. You do not want to find yourself in a Series A financing across the table from a sophisticated investor, and that is the first time you're thinking about trademarking and being asked questions, and you're on the back foot and realizing, oh, well, I spent half of my seed money, pursuing this strategy, which I'm now finding is actually riddled with issues because there's, trademark infringements. That, again, doesn't happen a lot, but it's something that I would say 9 out of 10 companies miss. And to give you some context, doing a trademark search, which Atrium doesn't even do, so I'm not even selling my own stuff here, right? But doing a trademark search will set you back about $500 with an experienced trademark attorney who can give you the lay of the land and do the search for the prior art. Before you spend $10,000 in a domain name, and I've seen people spend $500,000 on a domain name, but before you invest that kind of capital, let's just make sure you understand the lay of the land.
So the last topic is fundraising. How do you get money through the door? So you have what we call convertibles, which could either be a convertible note or it could be a safe. Most people are more familiar with the safe as opposed to a convertible note. And the other side of that coin are priced rounds, where you're actually selling preferred stock. So in terms of the safe, both of them have a term sheet. So I've seen safe term sheets and preferred stock term sheets, priced round term sheets. The distinction is a couple. So the first thing for safes, less touch points in terms of negotiating what safes are. In Silicon Valley especially, a lot of people know what a safe is and know the particular terms. The things that will be most negotiated with investors will be your valuation cap and a discount. So the valuation cap is kind of the bare minimum that an investor, so early investors who come into your company and say, yes, I will take this safe agreement, and in exchange, I will give you X amount of money. And perhaps at some point in the future, I will have some return on that, but I have no idea if that will happen. So these safeguards are what investors put in place in order to kind of get some benefit behind their initial investment. The valuation cap is just kind of what is the minimum amount or value that the safe holder is willing to have the shares sold for. So if you have a safe note that converts, your valuation cap is kind of what per share price that particular safe holder is going to get. Be wary of the valuation cap because that also impacts how much you're giving up, right? So if you are raising 1 million on a 4 million valuation, if you do the math, you're giving up 20% of your company. So be very careful in terms of when you're negotiating the valuation cap and how that actually impacts you when these safes convert. Another thing to remember with safes is that they are not candy. You do have to get them authorized by your board in order to issue safes. We see a lot of founders that, have a safe in hand, they're out, trying to get money, but it's a simple board consent that just authorizes you to do that raising of the money will save a lot of headache down the road. In terms of the discount, so essentially a discount, typically it's anywhere from 0 to 20%. You mainly see kind of like 20% is what you'll see for a discount usually on a safe agreement. And essentially what that is just saying in the future, at some future point, if I don't hit my valuation cap, I can get whatever preferred stock you're selling for 80 cents as opposed to $1, which everyone else is getting. And so those are kind of the main contentious things that you'll have to probably negotiate with an investor will be the valuation cap and the discount. In terms of the preferred or priced round, that gets a lot more involved. So when you're getting into a price round, that means that you are going to be changing your charter. You're going to have to be negotiating the term sheets, which is going to be more than just a valuation cap and a discount. Those are irrelevant in a price round. What you're going to be looking at is how many people are going to be on my board? Who will be on my board? You're going to be looking at things like getting involved in ancillary documents, so voting agreements, investor rights agreements, rights of first refusal. So if you're trying to sell, who can the company stop me from selling? Can investors stop me from selling? So when you get into a price round, it gets more involved, and that's definitely when you need a lot more legal assistance and help to kind of get you through that process. In terms of when you want to kind of touch on which one, so I'm out there, I'm raising a SAFE. How do I know if I want a SAFE versus a preferred, or a price round, or even a convertible note? I kind of glossed over convertible note because a lot of people don't use them. So a convertible note is essentially a debt instrument. So it's more like I am loaning you money, and you will owe me the money back plus interest by a set period of time. It's the difference in a SAFE is that there's no interest on a SAFE and there's no maturity date, which means a SAFE can stay outstanding for as long as it wants. There are 3 trigger events for a SAFE. There's a change of control, you have a liquidation event, or you're sold, IPO or you're sold. And those are kind of the triggers for when a SAFE terminates. Whereas a convertible note actually has a deadline. It has an actual date where you have to either repay or give the person stock. In terms of when each would come into play, I'd say for a convertible note, that's more of a debt instrument, and you probably don't want debt on your books at this stage. I would say a SAFE would kind of come into play when you're raising anywhere from probably about, we had discussed to maybe up to about 4 million. You could probably get away with using a SAFE. Anything over that, you're probably looking at more sophisticated kind of venture firms that probably would want a preferred term sheet at that stage. But that's not to say that it can't happen. I have some startups that I formed and they got a term sheet day one. They went out looking for SAFEs and got a preferred price round term sheet. So it is kind of varied, and the market will kind of tell you what it will bear in terms of what you can get. But that's kind of like a general rule, is that the first up to 4 million can be raised on a SAFE. In terms of kind of how do you prepare for a financing? So Jared had kind of touched on it, and a lot of it's really simple. It's just being organized. You have your formation documents. Are they somewhere where you can find them, right? Are they in one place? You have your equity grants. Has everyone signed their stock option grants? Do we have documentation of that? Has everyone signed a CIIA? Do we have stock restriction agreements in place for all of the founders? So it's just kind of that as you go along, the more you put in place, so have a Dropbox or have some type of repository for these documents. When it comes to doing a price round, diligence is so much more easier. You're not searching around for certain documentation that is going to be asked for during an actual diligence. And so, you can go online and find out, what is included in a due diligence list. That's very simple. I think YC even has a due diligence list, just to think of the documents that you should probably be putting in some type of repository for the eventuality that you'll be doing a price round, or, who knows, you might be being sold or bought. The key takeaways. So prioritization, if you want something quick and nimble, I would say SAFE. Again, get it authorized by the board. Second would be a convertible note, but that would be like a last resort kind of second step, just because it is a debt instrument and you'd be putting debt on your books earlier than you need to. And then for sure, I would say the price round is probably when you're further along in your fundraising. The other thing about doing a price round is it takes more time for the for the founders, because you're going out there pounding the pavement. So, in terms of thinking about how much you need to get through the door and how much time you have in order to devote to this, think really, strategically about what you're going to be pursuing and at what point. And the second thing, all I can say is just be organized. That will make your life a lot easier down the road when you do actually end up doing a price round. Maybe you get sold or acquired. It just makes life a lot easier. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Hopefully this was useful, and we'll see you outside.